let's go ahead. We'll get started. Hi, everyone. We are going to start today by talking about the final paper that's due in class at the end of the semester. But you'll also see that, sorry, make sure I get this right. You'll also see that part of this paper is due as a draft in a couple of weeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a general idea of what I expect of you for the final paper, and then we'll work backwards and I'll tell you exactly what I want for the first draft. Right? I think that's the least confusing way of going about this. So for those of you who want this, you can also find this file on Canvas. So the final paper is asking you to do a rhetorical analysis on something political, anything of your choice. And as you can see, I take a broad understanding of politics, so it doesn't have to just be someone in government. It could be a social movement. It could be a television show that's political, anything like that. Right? So I'm going to scroll down to give you an idea of what your paper should be broken into. All right, so you're doing a rhetorical analysis, and what you need to do, the first thing that you should be doing is deciding which piece of political rhetoric you're going to talk about. So what I mean by this is if you're going to choose a character from a television show or whatever artifact you want to explore a little bit more. What's really important about this is you're not exploring some abstract idea. Like, for example, don't choose like, I want to talk about whether we can ever make America great again. That's not a rhetorical analysis. That's a whole other, like, it's more of like a philosophical paper. And so you won't get done what I want you to get done. Is this making sense so far, Joe? Mm-hmm. Okay. So after you pick your artifact, obviously you can write an intro with the thesis. Make sure that in your artifact section, you're describing the artifact to me as if I've never heard of it. So even if you know I've heard of it, like I played the speech in class before, pretend like I didn't and give me a little bit of context surrounding that particular speech. And please make sure that you end with research questions. You miss points if you do not have research questions, even in the first draft. So that's really important. And we can talk through research questions like one-on-one. So Joe, if you have more like specific questions about your topic, we could talk after this video. So that way you don't have to like see, no one has to see you work through your ideas in front of camera. So the next thing that you'll do in the paper is you'll pick a couple of theories or concepts from the class and just summarize them in this section. So what you're gonna have to start doing is thinking about which concepts we've talked about work well together. So be careful about throwing things like, I'm gonna throw the public sphere with dramatism together. Those two things are looking at two very different parts of the world. So public sphere looks at like the way we talk about things as a society, and dramatism looks at an individual and how they're performing their acts. So putting those two together isn't gonna make for a good paper because you're gonna be making completely different arguments. Is that making sense?
Okay, so you just need a couple concepts to discuss in that, I guess, so-called section or whatever.
Exactly. And I've tried to give you some things like there, you know, after we did dramatism, there was another one about forms of substance that works really well with dramatism. Today we're going to be talking about another Kenneth Burke subject. So look at some of the stuff. Ideology has a lot of intersections with some of the stuff we've talked about too. So see when you can find like the things that link up well together, and that will make for a really good paper.
So you prefer that than just like going one thing that can go along with the topic, or you just feel it gives more depth, you know, for later on?
Do you mean topic as in like the artifact you chose?
The theories. I mean, is the goal to apply more than just one theory, or combine similar theories onto your whatever your topic or political?
Yes. So the goal should be to have a couple of topics working or concepts working together.
Okay.
But also being careful about not having two that are just completely separate, because then you're making two separate papers.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like a good one would be public sphere and public screen, because both of, I mean, the public screen builds off of the public sphere.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then the next section will be an analysis, and this is where you bring your artifact together with your theory. So this section is the first time when you should be saying, I see this form of substance in the speech that I chose, and then you start to break it down even more. The summary section should not include any reference to your artifact at all. This is where you will start talking about that and intersecting them together. Make sense? This is where like a lot of mistakes are made. This is why I'm emphasizing it so much. And then finally, your discussion section. This is where you are going to tell me why what you just said in your analysis section matters. So for example, if you analyzed a speech from Donald Trump, and maybe it was like one of his campaign speeches, and then you found that he used a lot of feminine forms of charisma. That's what you found in your analysis. So in your discussion, you can say, perhaps this means that more men will be able to start using feminine forms of charisma in the future, right? Because you saw it as successful. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not saying that this is what you're going to find, but just I'm trying to use an example. I'm not sure that Trump uses a lot of feminine forms of charisma, but he can surprise me.
I mean, or you could say that maybe he's not as anti-feminist or whatever as you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because of that, I don't know how in depth you can go with that, but
yeah.
Just, okay, I get what you're saying.
But yeah, what I'm saying is like you found something here. Now tell me why that matters for everyone else.
Okay. And
then obviously your conclusion, just restate the main points. And then this time around, unlike your other papers, you need a reference page or works cited. I don't care if you use MLA or APA, but be consistent with whichever one you choose. Okay. And the final thing I want to emphasize before we get to like deadlines, minimum of 5 academic sources in your final paper. 2 of them should be from the class. 3 of them need to be outside of the class. That makes sense? Okay. All right, so that's a general idea of what you're doing. I've given you some suggestions on like topic ideas if any of you are struggling with that. Your final paper is due during finals week, and it's supposed to be 8 to 10 pages, which I know is a lot. And for some of you, this is the first time you've written a paper this long. So something that I do, and obviously this is not something that applies to this class. It only applies to my in-person classes. So you don't have to turn in a physical copy. But something that I do for all of my classes is I have them do a first draft. So your first draft is due April 26th. Obviously online for this class, and you only need to have 2 academic sources in this draft. And the parts of this draft that you need, or the parts that need to be in this draft are intro, the description section, and the theory section, and that's it.
Okay. So that's an actual hard requirement, that date, right? I know you kind of led to say this is what you do. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
It's actually have to turn in. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So even though it's a draft, it is absolutely required. It's worth 50 points, which is a pretty big chunk of your grade. And it helps me help you, because then I give you feedback and annotation so that at least those first 3 sections should be good to go when you turn in that final draft.
Yeah.
And you're more than welcome to turn in more than that if you want, and I can just give you feedback on the rest. And the rest of it won't count against your grade.
Cool.
Any questions?
None here.
Okay, cool. All right, well, we'll see if, I know once it gets closer, that's when questions start to arise. So let's go ahead and move into the reading for today. So let me see if I can find. Sorry, give me just a second. I thought I had it opened up here. Oh, here it is. Right in front of my face. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the comic frame. And this is a concept from Kenneth Burke as well. So for those of you who are like looking for things to line up with dramatism, this is one of those that might work. Oops, sorry. So what I want to make sure that we understand is that you know the difference between frames of acceptance and frames of rejection, which you all sort of had to talk about in your research or your reading questions. Then we'll talk about perspectives by incongruity and why this is so important to social movements or people who are trying to get people to change their minds. And then finally, on your own time, when you get to your participation points this week, you'll see how the comic frame can be used to get your voice heard. So you'll have some time to work through that on your own. Cool. All right, so let's get started and we'll see what questions arise. So first of all, Kenneth Burke, we all know that he studies things like the way individuals use actions, right? And he wants to get into things like motives and how we do the things that we do, and how we put things like deterministic screens up to prevent some people from being included in our conversations, but then allowing other people to be included. So that's sort of the things that we learn about typically with Kenneth Burke. His frames of acceptance and frames of rejection concepts are concepts that don't, like, especially in foundational rhetoric classes, we don't typically talk about, but are concepts that align with a lot of the things that we do talk about in relation to him. So first of all, of course, frames are ways that we view the world. It's sort of like how we talked about ideology. But when he's talking about frames, he's talking about individuals and the way they individually see the world. So we can approach the world in two different ways. So one of the ways is through acceptance, which is the comic frame. Right? And I know that this is sort of a reading question. Joe, do you remember what the comic frame hopes for? Or what it does for us?
It doesn't try to get or let the audience in on what's not there in the story or like the fallacies in the story. I could be slightly off. You know, I had to elaborate and kind of go like outside of the reading a little bit to like kind of read a little bit more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the goal is to have the viewer be responsible for kind of, I don't know.
Yeah. So I know it's just me and you, so I don't want to be the only one doing the talking. So thank you for getting
No, it's fine. I don't mind it. It helps, but it was I was kind of hard to see like what's the main goal of it. You know, I kind of understood what was trying to happen, but I just didn't know what perspective he was trying to get us to take on it.
Yeah. So the idea behind this and like your goal, you probably don't realize that your goal is there, but if you're coming at someone with a frame of acceptance, you're coming at them with the hope that you will understand each other, the hope that you will want to listen to each other. I put this idea of agree to disagree here with a little plus sign, because it's not just agree to disagree. It's like going further than that. Because I think sometimes when we agree to disagree, we still leave very angry, like arms crossed, like I'm going to agree to disagree, but I don't want to talk to you anymore. The idea behind a comic frame or a frame of acceptance is sort of being okay with the disagreeing with each other and hoping that that other person will sort of maybe eventually come over to your side, but if they don't, that's okay as well. Does this sound familiar? Does it sound like any concepts we've talked about?
Yes, but I'm gonna have a hard time remembering.
Okay. It's been a while, so it should sound familiar because invitational rhetoric builds at least some of their stuff off of the comic frame. That's not the only like theoretical framework they use, but Kenneth Burke is one of the people that they looked to for understanding like how we could approach the world in a different way. So while frames of acceptance sounds great, Kenneth Burke also believes that we have frames of rejection, which, as this says on the slide, typically a tragic frame, a frame where there's only one correct perspective. So this is where like it's not agree to disagree plus, it's agree to disagree and then leave angry.
Quick question. I don't know if the slides are playing. Maybe it's just my end. Are you, because what I'm viewing is the Sarah Palin and the Mama Grizzlies. Is that supposed to be there?
No, that's cool. Thanks.
I don't know if you're not seeing it on your end, but
No, I'm not.
I was curious for a second. I think that was a little bit of what was distracting me because I keep, like what you're saying. I'm like,
I'm
wait.
sorry. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can fix this. That's awesome. So you're getting my Rhetoric of Women course rather than here. Let me see. Let me just close out of this one and see what's happening here. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. Are you seeing perspectives by incongruity now?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So I'm not going to go back over this, but here's the slide that you were supposed to have seen.
Okay, I was wondering where the agree to disagree was. And okay, gotcha.
Okay, all right. So here we go. Let's move. Oh, actually, so we were talking about frames of rejection, right? So when you're approaching the world in a frame of rejection, not only do you only see one right perspective, but you want to make sure that that other person or everyone else is on your side of things. So you're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that that's true. And Kenneth Burke would say that most of us in society, at least when he was writing, and he's writing in like the 50s, approach the world through a frame of rejection, right? They approach the world trying to get everyone to be on their side. Is that something you agree with, disagree with?
No, I agree with that. A lot of people don't understand there's other opinions, views or facts that, that are out there, that we should at least be aware of.
Yeah. And I mean, so something I think is that a lot of us think that we're here, but when it comes down to like things that we have like a strong opinion on, we're still in the frame of rejection, right? We like can sort of say we're here, but really many of us are unfortunately stuck here. And part of that is because we learn to be that way in K through 12 education. Like we're taught that this is the right way to do things in almost every field that we learn growing up. And so it makes sense that then that's how we approach the world, right? And so something that Kenneth Burke wants is he wants us to try to get more people to move into a frame of acceptance, which is where we're going with the Guerrilla Girls and what they're trying to do. Any questions before we move forward?
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So one thing that allows for at least the possibility of people to move into a frame of acceptance is perspective by incongruity. So we've talked about incongruity before when we were talking about humor, right? So we know that something will be humorous if it's unexpected or different, right? So two frames of reference that don't belong together become really humorous. All right, so when we're talking about perspective by incongruity, Kenneth Burke adds another layer to that idea of humor. And what he's saying is that that incongruity allows for us to see the world in a bigger way, right? So it almost does, it's not even allows, it sometimes forces us to think through the ways other people might see something. And an example of this, like a really simple one, don't even have to get into politics, is this sign right, there are these two signs right here. So there are a lot of reasons why these signs might be placed together, right? They seem like they don't belong together. But just to like lay out a couple of reasons. One might be, this is the one that I think of, it might be reminding people who are at the stop sign in this little mini mall that you don't stop and then like park your car. You have to eventually keep moving. I know some of us have been in mini malls where people don't look around and they think, okay, I'm at a stop sign, I'll just like text real quick. This might be reminding them to do that, right? It might be telling pedestrians who are over here to keep moving while the cars stop, right? It might be that the camera is giving us a trick on the way we're seeing things, right? But the list, we could continue making the list, and that's sort of the point that I'm starting to open up my perspective of why these things are going together. And I may not ever know the correct reason why, right? I might just know the way I see it seems to be correct, but other people could see it in a different way. And he described this as sort of atom cracking. So when we do this in like through advertisements, like culture jamming or something, we're sort of blowing up the thing that seemed to be really small. We open it up and we start to see, whoa, there's so much more inside of this than we realized. Are you with me?
Yeah.
I know I get really nerdy on this one. I used my master's thesis. Like this is one of the theories that I used in it. So it's one of the ones I've learned, I know the most. So one thing that can be challenging that when it comes to perspective by incongruity is that we need to have people who are willing to be confronted with new ideas, willing to work through contradictions in order for them to gain perspective. So it's yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I might have cut you off too early. So very, like, this wouldn't work well with people that are very narrow-minded, stuck in the ways, because they're not open to, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so if I'm thinking if you're very, like, alpha male and you believe, like, this is the way the world is or whatever, based, you know, those qualities or whatever, and you can't, like, you won't even entertain those other things just because you're narrow-minded when, you know, it's, who's to say that that's, you know, the way males should be or whatever, you know, it's like, it's just, that's what came to mind is like, you have to be willing to understand that, yeah, maybe it is, maybe it's not, like, who knows?
Yeah. So all of those characteristics you just described are people who are operating within the tragic frame, right?
Okay.
And the idea is that Burke wants us to get out of that tragic frame. So it's sort of like the people who might be able to get out are like teetering on the edge of that frame. And we have to capture those people who are like on the edge.
Okay.
He didn't talk about it like that, but I think that's the best way of looking at it if we're thinking about moving someone into a frame of acceptance. And what's important here is that I don't think that we are only, like, I think one day we might be a frame of acceptance and the next day it might be the tragic frame. So it depends on a lot of things. It's not something that like we stick to for the rest of our lives. And this is why perspective by incongruity can be so important, because it can sort of shake us up on the days when we are in the tragic frame. Are you with me?
Yeah, but isn't he just like promoting persuasive rhetoric, or just like rhetoric that's persuasive just on the notion of just take the opposite of something, you know, and, you know, you're bound to get some, as long as people are open-minded. I don't know. You know, maybe I'm thinking a little too deep into it.
No. He's saying that this putting two things together, I mean, he doesn't say it outright, but putting two things together is persuasive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on superficial level, it makes us want to pay attention because we're confused, right? But on like the deeper level, what he's saying is like that confusion can lead to us opening up our mind, right? Because some of us want to work through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we're going to just talk through a couple of examples of the Guerrilla Girls, because what's really important is that you understand Kenneth Burke's concept. You don't really need to know all the things that the Guerrilla Girls did. But I'm going to give you some examples so that when you start to try to do this with your participation points this week, you can see what it looks like. Okay. So if you want to know about the background of the Guerrilla Girls, you can Google them, and there's a bunch of really good videos, but I won't make you sit through this part of it. But they're really interesting and really awesome. But more importantly for this discussion, a few of the strategies that they use that provides perspective by incongruity is mimicry, historical revision, and strategic juxtaposition. So these are pretty much exactly like they sound. So when we're talking about mimicry, we're talking about them using even the word girls and sort of embracing that word as women rather than allowing that word to be something that's negative, right? So mimicking the way that maybe other parts of society disrespect them. Historical revision is just allowing us to know new ways of seeing not just the art world, but now they're in the political world as well. And then finally, strategic juxtaposition is purposely placing two things together that don't belong together. So I'm going to show you a few examples of some of this in action, and you might see these strategies all working together at once. All right, so any questions before I show you examples?
Nope.
Okay, hopefully the examples will help clarify. Okay, so here's one thing that they did, and this is one of their early ones from like the mid 80s. And this is historical revision for the most part, but it's also mimicry because it's, I don't know if you remember these things, but when I was a kid, we had a bunch of like these board games that had quizzes like this. And so you sort of like won points if you got this right. So they're mimicking those things that we're familiar with and making something new. This is an original art piece, and this is what they did with it. So obviously there's some mimicking there, and there's strategic juxtaposition, where they're putting like the gorilla mask with the beautiful woman's body. And there's historical revision. I want to show you one more, and then I'll ask if there are questions and we'll conclude. So I'm going to move forward a little bit. Okay, so this is the last one I want to show you, and this is where they get political. And they've done more recent stuff, but this is one of them that was in the textbook, so I used this one. So you can read this yourself. And can you tell me which one you think this is, if it's mimicry, strategic juxtaposition, or historical revisionist?
Strategic juxtaposition.
Yes, and I mean in a couple of ways, but the specific one is like the cross with the cap, right? With the graduation cap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we also see like the education, and then the people going into the army.
Like you're starting, well, you know, the graduation at, you know, signifies, you know, starting of a new life or a new chapter of your life, whereas, you know, the cross is like death, you know, end of life. So yeah. Okay.
So
I see how it plays off each other.
Yeah, but what I want to ask you, so the idea here is that they're supposed to be moving people into this perspective by incongruity, where they are approaching the world through a frame of acceptance. Does this advertisement make you feel like they're approaching the world in this way? Or in other words, does it shut out anyone that you think maybe should be listening to them?
I think it shuts out more than it lets in.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I just don't think like, okay, well, you're really just talking about people that join the army for wanting to get an education. You know, there's still a lot bigger, you know, educational problems, you know, that are out there for, you know, public education or whatever, you know. And
yeah, I mean, so the reason why I'm asking you that question is I think sometimes when people, this gets back to what I was saying before, they feel like they're approaching it through this frame of acceptance, this comic frame. They're being funny. So if they're being funny, then it can't be taken too seriously. But if they're really trying to approach people in a frame of acceptance, they're supposed to be allowing for as many people as possible to want to see this. And to me, I mean, it doesn't just shut out people in the military, but it shuts out almost anyone who's conservative, automatically, right? I mean, I think about people from my hometown, like they see this, they don't want to know more from the Guerrilla Girls because this has offended them, right? And so I'm not saying that they shouldn't have done this. I'm just saying that I think that the author may have stretched too far to see all of it as strictly in the comic frame, right? So
inclusive, right? Is that kind of,
what'd you say?
To be inclusive, or like of like more of like everybody? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because they would say that this is a joke, so they are being inclusive. But I think part of this is about perspective, and there are plenty of people who like do not see this as a joke at all. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, I guess the reason why I want us to think about this is think about how other people who you're trying to bring in would see it.
Yeah.
And is that the purpose? Like, is that really what you want to do? Do you want to exclude them? If you do, then keep doing it. But you're not operating within the frame of acceptance if you want to exclude them.
Yeah, and I don't think he tried hard enough to be inclusive of everybody. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of what I've taken away from it.
Mhm. I mean, I think that the author, so the girly girls don't call them, like they don't think of themselves as like frame of acceptance versus frame of rejection, but I think your author could have complicated things more.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think it made it more like harder to either interpret or harder to understand. Like, what are you trying to convey here? You
Yeah.
know, like
Yeah.
who? What are we supposed to like? What more information are we supposed to be aware of, or like who are you trying to reach out to? I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. It seems like you're just preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to make sure that we had sort of a little critique of what the author was trying to say. But most importantly, what I want you to get from this conversation is know the difference between the comic frame / frame of acceptance, which is the same, and the frame of rejection. And then also know what perspective by incongruity is. Those are the two things that you would use in like a, you would use, sorry, my dog just knocked over something.
It's
You would use
okay.
it like a paper or something like that. Sound
Okay.
good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna, do you have any questions before I stop recording?
No, I do, but you could stop recording. It's not nothing in regard to so much I think the class would use.
Okay, all right.